The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of the coffee shop, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Inside, the air buzzed with the usual downtown rush. Lattes being poured, laptops clicking, people chatting over the low hum of indie folk music. Near the counter, a man in a dark gray sweater stood quietly, one hand resting on his tablet, the other holding a reusable cup. He wasn't in a hurry. His name was Darius, and he'd been coming to this place every Tuesday for the past 3 years. The baristas knew his order by heart. Black coffee, no sugar, extra hot. He scrolled through a set of architectural plans, eyes focused but relaxed. Today was a big day. He was finalizing the design for a new community center in the East Side neighborhood, a project he'd poured his heart into. It wasn't just another job. It was personal. His grandmother used to tell him stories about how, when she was young, there were no safe places for kids to gather after school. We made our own, she'd say, under streetlights and in church basements. Now he was building one that would last. A few feet behind him, a woman tapped her foot impatiently. She wore a crisp beige trench coat and carried a designer tote that probably cost more than Darius's monthly grocery bill. Her name was Linda, though no one in the shop knew it yet. She'd already sighed loudly twice, rolled her eyes at the line, and muttered something about incompetent staff. When the person ahead of her took an extra minute to ask about oat milk alternatives, Linda's frustration boiled over. "Unbelievable," she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut through the cafe's calm. "Some people have no sense of urgency. Or manners." A few heads turned. Darius didn't react. He'd heard comments like that before, veiled, coded, sometimes not so veiled. He kept his eyes on his screen, jaw relaxed. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, but Linda wasn't done. She stepped closer, as if proximity would make her point land harder. "You know," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness, "if you're going to stand there like a statue, maybe you should just go back to where you came from." The room went still. Even the barista froze mid-pour. The indie music kept playing, but it felt distant now, like background noise in a dream. Darius slowly lowered his tablet. He turned, not with anger, but with a quiet steadiness that somehow made the moment heavier. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, but right at her. His eyes held something she didn't expect. Not rage, but disappointment. Like he'd seen this before, and it hurt a little less each time, but never stopped hurting completely. "Go back to Africa?" he asked, voice calm, almost gentle. "Is that what you mean?" Linda stiffened. She hadn't said the word Africa, but everyone knew that's what she meant. She crossed her arms, chin lifting slightly. "Well, I don't see why you're acting like I insulted you. It's just geography." A young woman near the pastry case sucked in a breath. An older man in a flannel shirt shook his head slowly. No one spoke, but the silence was loud. Darius took a slow breath. He could walk away. He'd done it before, swallowed the sting, kept his dignity, moved on. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the weight of the community center plans in his hands. Maybe it was the memory of his grandmother's voice. Or maybe it was just that he was tired of pretending these moments didn't matter. "You think I don't belong here," he said, voice still low, but carrying clearly through the room. "But my family's been in this country longer than most," Linda scoffed. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture." "I'm not lecturing," he said. "I'm just telling you the truth. My great-great-grandfather was born right here in this state, on a plantation, owned by a man whose last name was Hargrove." Linda blinked. The name hit her like a cold splash of water. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond. Darius didn't wait for her to catch up. He never saw Africa. Neither did his father or his grandfather before that. They were born here, lived here, died here, working land they couldn't own, raising children they couldn't protect. "And you want me to go back to a place my ancestors were stolen from centuries ago?" His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the room. Someone near the back pulled out their phone. Not to film dramatically, but quietly, like they knew this moment mattered. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked unsure. That's ancient history," she finally said, but her voice lacked its earlier edge. "Is it?" Darius asked. "My grandmother couldn't vote until she was 30. My father was followed in stores when he was my age. And this morning you told me to leave a country my blood helped build, brick by brick, rail by rail, field by field." He paused, letting the words settle. So if anyone should be asked to go back, maybe it's the people who forget how this country really came to be. The barista finally finished pouring the coffee and set it down gently, as if afraid to break the moment. No one moved to order next. No one checked their phone. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. Linda stared at him, her face unreadable. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She just stood there, caught in the weight of something she hadn't expected to face before her morning caffeine. Darius picked up his coffee, gave a small nod, not to her but to the room, to the quiet solidarity forming in the air, and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the bell above the entrance jingled softly and the cafe exhaled. Inside, people began to whisper. Not about him, but to each other. Questions, realizations, murmurs of "I had no idea," and that was something else. Linda stayed in line, but she didn't order. She just stood there staring at the floor, her designer tote suddenly feeling very heavy in her hand. Outside, Darius took a slow sip of his coffee. It was still too hot, just the way he liked it. He walked down the street, shoulders straight, mind already turning back to blueprints and beams and the future he was building. Not just on paper, but in real life. And though he didn't know it yet, this quiet Tuesday morning would become something far bigger than a rude comment in a coffee shop. It would ripple outward, touching lives he'd never meet, sparking conversations in places he'd never see. But for now, he just walked, calm, steady, and deeply, unshakably rooted in the truth of who he was and where he belonged. The coffee shop incident didn't end when Darius walked out the door. In fact, it was just beginning. Back inside, a college student named Tasha had quietly recorded the last minute of the exchange on her phone. She wasn't looking for drama. She'd just wanted to capture the raw honesty in Darius's voice. Later that afternoon, while waiting for the bus, she posted the clip to her social media with a simple caption. "This happened today. I couldn't unhear it." Within hours, the video had thousands of views. By evening, it was being shared by local activists, history teachers, and even a few news bloggers. People weren't just reacting to the insult. They were struck by Darius's response. Not angry, not performative, just real. Grounded in truth, not theatrics. Darius didn't know any of this at first. He'd gone straight to his office, buried himself in renderings for the community center, and tried to forget the morning's tension. But around 6 p.m., his phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from friends. "Did you see this? Is this you? Bro, you're all over Twitter." He opened the video with a knot in his stomach, expecting mockery or outrage. Instead, he saw comments like, "Thank you for speaking with such grace. My grandfather went through the same thing. This is why we need to teach real history." Still, he felt uneasy. He hadn't wanted to become a symbol. He just wanted to be seen as a person, not a stereotype. That night, he drove to his grandmother's old house on the south side of town. It had been empty since she passed 2 years ago, but he kept it maintained, visiting every few weeks to water the garden she'd loved. He sat on the porch steps, the evening air warm and thick with the scent of jasmine. He pulled out his phone again and scrolled through the video comments. One stood out. "If his family was enslaved by Hargroves, someone should look into that. My great-uncle worked at the county archives. Those records are public." Darius paused. He'd always known bits and pieces of his family history, stories passed down at kitchen tables and funerals. His grandmother used to say, "We came from Carolina soil, not African shores." But he'd never dug deep. Not until now. The next morning, he called in a half-day at work and headed to the city's historical archive. The building was quiet, tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore. Inside, shelves stretched floor to ceiling, filled with dusty ledgers, land deeds, and census records dating back to the 1800s. An archivist named Mr. Ellis, a soft-spoken man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted him. "You're the young man from the video," he said, not unkindly. "I saw it last night. My wife cried." Darius nodded, a little embarrassed. I need to know if what I said was accurate, about the Hargrove name." Mr. Ellis didn't ask for proof or push back. He simply led Darius to a microfilm reader and pulled up plantation records from 1850. Hargrove Plantation, he said, pointing to a faded line, located near Edgefield, owned by Silas Hargrove. Darius's breath caught. There, in careful cursive, were names, first names only, as was common for enslaved people, listed under property. Among them, Isaiah, age 24, field hand, valued at $800. Isaiah. His great-great-grandfather, Mr. Ellis flipped to another page, 1870 census, the first after emancipation. Look here, he said, tapping the screen. Isaiah Cole, living in Edgefield. Occupation farmer, can't read or write, but he owned 3 acres of land by 1875. Darius stared at the name. Cole, his name. Not given by choice, but likely adopted from the family that once claimed ownership over his bloodline. Yet Isaiah had built something anyway. Land. A home. A future. He never left. Darius whispered. No, Mr. Ellis said gently, and neither did his children, or theirs. Later that day, Darius sat in his car outside the archives, rain beginning to patter on the windshield. He thought about Linda, the woman in the coffee shop. She'd said go back to Africa like it was a throwaway line, like history began and ended with her convenience. But the truth was messier, deeper, and far more personal than she realized. He didn't hate her. Not really. He pitied her for living in a world so narrow that she couldn't see the roots beneath her own feet. That evening, he posted a short message on his otherwise empty social media account. My family didn't come from Africa in the way people think. We were brought here against our will centuries ago. We stayed, we built, we survived. And we're still here, not as guests, but as part of this country's foundation. He attached a scanned copy of the 1870 census record with Isaiah Cole's name circled in red. The post went viral faster than the video. News outlets reached out. A local TV station asked for an interview. Darius declined most, but agreed to one condition. If they covered the story, they had to include the archival records, not just his face. This isn't about me, he told the producer. It's about the millions of stories like mine that get erased. Meanwhile, Linda's identity had been pieced together online, not through doxing, but because someone recognized her coat from a company event photo. Her employer, a mid-sized real estate development firm, issued a vague statement about valuing diversity, but didn't mention her by name. Privately, Linda was reeling. At first, she told friends it was taken out of context. But then she saw the census record. Then she saw photos of Edgefield, rolling fields, old churches, a historical marker near a creek that read, Site of Hargrove Plantation, Estier, 1823. She Googled her own family tree on a whim. Her great-great-grandfather? Silas Hargrove. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time staring at the screen, the weight of inheritance pressing down on her like a physical thing. She'd never been taught this. Her family talked about Southern heritage, but never about who built that heritage or at what cost. She didn't post anything, didn't apologize publicly. But that night, for the first time in years, she called her father and asked, "What do you know about our family's past?" Back in his apartment, Darius scrolled through messages from strangers, some angry, some grateful, many just curious. One stood out. A high school student wrote, "I'm doing a project on local history. Can I interview you? I want to tell Isaiah's story too." Darius smiled faintly. Maybe that was the point. Not to shame, but to remember. Not to divide, but to connect. He closed his laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a woman was confronting a truth she never knew. Somewhere else, a kid was digging into the past for the first time. And in a quiet archive, a name long reduced to a line in a ledger was finally being seen as a person. History wasn't just dates and documents, it was alive. In coffee shops, in classrooms, in the choices people made after the cameras stopped rolling. And Darius, he wasn't done speaking. But next time, he wouldn't be alone. The video didn't just spread, it settled into people's lives like dust after a storm, quiet but impossible to ignore. Within 3 days, it had been viewed over 2 million times, not because it was flashy or edited for drama, but because it felt real, too real for some, too necessary for others. Darius kept his phone on silent most of the time. He still went to work, still met with contractors about the community center, still drank his black coffee every Tuesday, though he switched to a different cafe just to avoid the stares. He wasn't trying to disappear, but he also wasn't looking to become a spokesperson. He'd said what he needed to say. The rest wasn't up to him, but the world had other plans. A local news station reached out, not for a sensational take, but to follow up on the historical records. They interviewed Mr. Ellis from the archives, showed the 1870 census page, even visited Edgefield to film the overgrown field where the Hargrove plantation once stood. They didn't use dramatic music or slow-motion shots, just facts, just truth. And somehow that was more powerful than any script could be. Meanwhile, Linda stayed out of sight. She called in sick to work, unplugged her social media, sat in her living room with old family photo albums spread across the floor. In one, a black and white portrait of a stern-looking man in a waistcoat, Silas Hargrove, labeled in her great-aunt's looping handwriting. Beneath it, a note, built the family fortune on good land and hard work. She stared at those words for a long time. Hard work, whose? She dug deeper, found a box of letters in the attic, yellowed envelopes tied with twine. One, dated 1866, read, "The freedmen are still lingering near the property. They claim they have a right to the south pasture. I told them the land belongs to us, as it always has." Her hands shook. This wasn't just history. It was inheritance of land, of silence, of unearned comfort. She didn't post about it, didn't make a grand apology video, but she started reading. Books on reconstruction, on redlining, on how wealth gaps were built over generations. She even signed up for a local history walking tour focused on black communities in the city. She went alone, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses not to hide, but because she wasn't ready to be recognized yet. Back in his neighborhood, Darius noticed something unexpected. Kids started stopping by his office. Not to gawk, but to ask questions. Is it true your family was here since slavery? How do you find your roots? What if your family name isn't really yours? He didn't have all the answers, but he listened. And one afternoon, while sketching a playground layout for the community center, an idea struck him. What if the center didn't just have a basketball court and a computer lab, but also a small history corner? A place where kids could explore their own family stories, with help from local historians and genealogists. He mentioned it to the project committee. They loved it, called it Roots and Futures. Around the same time, a message popped up in his inbox from a young woman named Keisha, a junior at the city college. She wrote, "My great-grandmother grew up in Edgefield, too. I think our families might have known each other. Can I meet you? Not for a paper, just to talk." They met at a park bench under an old oak tree. She brought a faded photo of her great-grandmother standing in front of a small house with a tin roof. She used to say, "We didn't come from nowhere. We came from right here." Darius nodded. Mine said the same thing. They talked for hours, about memory, about erasure, about how hard it is to trace your line when records were never meant to honor you, only to count you as property. By the end, Keisha asked if she could volunteer at the new history corner. "I want to help other kids find what we're finding," she said. That same week, something else happened, quiet but significant. Linda's employer quietly donated $25,000 to the community center project. No press release, no logo on the wall, just a check with a note, "In support of truth and reconciliation." Darius suspected who was behind it, but he didn't say anything. He just made sure the funds went straight to the history corner. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, on crisp stationery, was a handwritten note. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know. I looked, I read, I listened. And I was wrong. Not just about you, but about everything I thought I knew. Thank you for making me see." No signature. But Darius knew. He folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer. Not as proof, but as a reminder that change doesn't always come with a microphone. Sometimes it comes in silence, in a donated check, In a late-night Google search, in a woman sitting alone with old letters, finally hearing the voices history tried to bury. One evening, Darius visited his grandmother's grave. He hadn't brought flowers. She'd always said, "Don't waste money on dead folks. Do something that matters while I'm gone." So instead, he brought blueprints. He sat on the grass, unrolled the plans for the community center, and pointed to the history corner. "This is for you, Grandma," he said softly. "And for Isaiah. And for all the ones they tried to forget." A breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere down the street, kids laughed, riding bikes past the old church where his grandmother used to sing in the choir. Back home, he checked his email one last time before bed. Another message from a teacher at a middle school across town. "My students watched the video in class. We're starting a unit on local history. Would you be willing to speak to them just for 20 minutes? Darius thought about it. He wasn't a performer, but he was a witness. And maybe that was enough. He typed back, "Yes, but only if they get to ask the questions." As he turned off the lamp, the city hummed outside his window, not with outrage or noise, but with the quiet energy of people beginning to listen. The story wasn't over. It was just finding new voices, new hands to carry it forward. And for the first time in a long time, Darius felt hopeful, not because the past had changed, but because the future was finally paying attention. The invitation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, not through a news crew or a viral post, but in person, hand-delivered by the pastor of Grace Community Church, a man Darius had known since he was a boy. The pastor didn't say much, just handed him a plain white envelope and said, "They're ready to listen, if you're willing to speak." Inside was a simple request, a community conversation. Not a debate, not a performance, just a gathering. Neighbors, students, elders, even a few reporters if they agreed to ground rules. No shouting, no cameras and faces, just truth shared in real time. Darius almost said no. He'd done enough talking. But then he thought of Keisha poring over old photos, of the middle schoolers writing him letters about their family trees, of the quiet donation that helped build a space for memory. This wasn't just about one moment in a coffee shop anymore. It was about what came after. He wrote back one word. Yes. The event was set for the following Saturday at the church fellowship hall, a wide, warm room with wooden pews, mismatched chairs, and a mural of doves on the back wall. Volunteers set up a circle of chairs, not rows. "We're not here to watch," the pastor told the team. "We're here to be with each other." News of the gathering spread quietly. No hashtags. No live stream. Just word of mouth. Still, by 10 a.m., the parking lot was full. People came in hoodies and work boots and Sunday dresses and sneakers. Some brought notebooks. Others just brought themselves, and then she walked in. Linda arrived 10 minutes early alone. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back. No designer bag, just a canvas tote with a library book peeking out. She hesitated at the door, eyes scanning the room like she expected boos or glares. But no one pointed. No one whispered. A woman near the coffee urn nodded at her. That was all. She took a seat near the back, hands folded in her lap, shoulders tense. Darius arrived a few minutes later. He didn't look at her right away. He greeted the pastor, hugged Keisha, shook hands with Mr. Ellis from the archives. Then he sat in the circle right across from Linda. Not by accident. Not for drama. Just because it was the only empty chair. The pastor opened with a short prayer. Not religious, really, just a moment of stillness. Then he turned to Darius. "Whenever you're ready." Darius took a breath. He didn't stand. Didn't raise his voice. He just spoke like he was talking to a friend over dinner. "I didn't come here to shame anyone," he began. "I came because I'm tired of history being a secret. My great-great-grandfather Isaiah was born into slavery on land owned by a Hargrove. After emancipation, he stayed. Bought 3 acres. Built a cabin with his own hands. His children went to school in a church basement because the city wouldn't fund theirs. My grandmother cleaned houses for white families so her kids could go to college. That's my back to Africa story. It's not exotic. It's not far away. It's right here, in the bricks of this city, in the soil of this state." He paused, then pulled out a small photo from his pocket. "This is Isaiah's youngest daughter, my great-grandmother. She lived to be 94, never left the county. Said she owed it to her father to stay and make something real." He passed the photo around the circle. People held it gently like it was sacred. Then Linda spoke. Her voice was shaky at first. I didn't know any of this, she said, eyes down. I grew up hearing about Southern pride and family legacy, but no one ever said whose backs that legacy was built on. She looked up, not at Darius, but at the group. I said something cruel because I was impatient. But the truth is, I've been impatient with history my whole life. Too impatient to learn it, too comfortable to question it. A long silence followed. Not awkward, just heavy with honesty. Then a young man in the front row raised his hand. Did you believe it? When you said go back to Africa, did you really think he didn't belong here? Linda didn't flinch. I didn't think at all, she admitted. That's the worst part. It was just a reflex, something I'd heard before, maybe from my grandparents, maybe from movies. I never stopped to ask if it made sense, or if it hurt. Another voice, an older black woman, her hair silver, her voice steady. My daddy used to say, they don't hate you because you're black. They hate you because they don't know you and they don't want to. Maybe that's changing. The conversation flowed from there. Not perfect, not polished, but real. A teacher shared how textbooks skip over local black contributions. A teenager talked about being called articulate like it was a surprise. Someone else mentioned how hard it is to trace ancestry when your people were listed as property. And then Darius asked Linda a question no one expected. What will you do now? She blinked, swallowed. I've started volunteering with a group that helps families research their roots, especially those whose records were lost or destroyed. I'm also working with my company to support affordable housing in neighborhoods that were redlined. It's not enough. But it's a start, Darius nodded. That's more than most do. He didn't say I forgive you, and she didn't ask for it. Instead, he stood, walked across the circle, and offered his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. It wasn't a grand gesture. No tears, no dramatic music. Just two people holding on for a few seconds in a room full of witnesses. Afterward, people lingered, shared coffee, exchanged numbers. A few stayed to help clean up. Linda didn't leave right away. She helped stack chairs, then approached Darius near the coat rack. I know this doesn't fix anything, she said quietly. No, he replied, but it's a beginning. She nodded, pulled on her jacket, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Later, Keisha asked Darius, do you think it changed her? I don't know, he said, but I know it changed the room. And sometimes that's how change starts, not with a bang, but with a circle of chairs and someone finally saying, I was wrong. That night, the local paper ran a small piece, not about conflict, but about connection. The headline read, Neighbors gather to listen, not to win. No sensational quotes. Just photos of people talking, listening, holding old documents like treasures. And in a quiet corner of the city, a woman sat at her kitchen table, writing a letter to her niece. Ask your history teacher about the families who built this town. Not just the ones who owned the land, but the ones who worked it, healed it, loved it, and stayed. The story wasn't over, but for the first time it wasn't just Darius's to carry. It belonged to everyone who chose to listen and to act. 3 months had passed since the coffee shop, since the video, since the circle of chairs in the church hall. The headlines had faded. The online debates had cooled. Life, as it always does, moved on, but not in the same direction it had before. Darius stood in the half-finished shell of the new community center, dust motes floating in the late afternoon light. The walls were up, the roof sealed, and the playground outside already had kids testing the swings, even though the paint wasn't dry. In the corner of what would soon be the main room, a small space had been framed off, wood paneling, soft lighting, shelves waiting to be filled. The Roots and Futures corner. He ran his hand along the smooth edge of a custom-built display case. Inside would go copies of census records, family photos donated by neighbors, oral history recordings from elders in the community. It wasn't a museum. It was a mirror, so young people could see themselves in the story of this place, not as footnotes but as central characters. A group of teenagers walked in, backpacks slung over their shoulders. They were part of a summer program Darius had started, History Builders, where kids learned how to trace their ancestry, interview relatives, and even help digitize old church records. One of them, a quiet girl named Nia, held a folder tightly to her chest. Mr. Cole, she said. I found something. He knelt so they were eye level. Show me. She opened the folder. Inside was a faded baptismal certificate from 1912. This is my great-great-grandmother, she said, voice trembling just a little. She was born right here in the city, worked as a seamstress, raised 6 kids alone after her husband died in a factory accident. Nobody ever wrote about her. But I found her. Darius smiled. Now everyone will know. Later that week, the center held its first open house. No ribbon-cutting spectacle, just open doors, free lemonade, and a sign that read, "Your story belongs here." Families wandered through, pointing at blueprints, testing the acoustics in the music room, sitting in the reading nook. In the history corner, Keisha helped a boy scan a photo of his grandfather in a World War II uniform. "We're adding him to the wall," she told him. "Heroes don't always wear capes." Meanwhile, across town, Linda sat in a modest office above a hardware store. She wasn't at her old firm anymore. After the coffee shop incident and the quiet reckoning that followed, she'd taken a leave of absence, then resigned. Not in shame, but in redirection. She now volunteered full-time with a nonprofit that helped low-income families secure housing in neighborhoods long denied to them through redlining and discriminatory lending. That morning, she'd helped an elderly black couple finalize the paperwork for their first home, a small bungalow with a porch just big enough for 2 rocking chairs. As they signed the final documents, the woman reached over and squeezed Linda's hand. "You don't know what this means?" she said softly. Linda nodded. "I'm starting to." She didn't mention her last name, didn't bring up the past. She just handed them the keys and walked away, heart full in a way she couldn't explain. Back at the community center, Darius took a break on the front steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. A group of kids played tag near the garden beds they'd planted together. Tomatoes, collards, marigolds. One of them, a boy no older than 10, plopped down beside him, breathing hard. "Mr. Cole?" he asked between gasps. "What if I find something bad in my family history? Like something sad or scary?" Darius didn't answer right away. He watched a butterfly land on a sunflower. "Then you hold it gently," he finally said. "You don't hide it. You don't let it define you, but you don't forget it either. Because that pain? It's part of why you're here, why you're strong, why you care." The boy thought about that. Then he nodded, stood up, and ran back to his friends. Lighter somehow. Inside the center, a local jazz quartet began to play. Not for an audience, just for the joy of it. The notes floated out the open windows, mixing with laughter and the hum of conversation. It wasn't perfect. The paint was still drying in places. The Wi-Fi acted up, but it was alive. A few days later, Darius received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. On the first page, in careful handwriting, was a family tree, starting with Silas Hargrove, then branching out, with notes in the margins. Owned 27 human beings in 1850. Refused to sell land to black farmers in 1921. Supported segregationist policies. At the bottom, a new line had been added in different ink. Linda Hargrove chose a different path. Tucked in the back was a check, enough to fund the History Corner's audio recording equipment for a year. And a note, "Let their voices be heard." Darius didn't cash the check right away. He placed the journal in the display case open to that page. Not as a trophy, not as a confession, but as proof that people can change, not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely. As summer turned to fall, the center became a hub, not just for programs, but for connection. A retired teacher hosted storytelling nights. A local chef taught cooking classes using recipes passed down for generations. And every Tuesday, Darius still came in early, sat in the history corner with a group of kids and helped them search for names, dates, truths. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently on the roof, a young girl looked up from a laptop and asked, "Do you think anyone will remember us someday?" Darius smiled. "Only if we leave something worth remembering." And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of young minds digging into the past to build their future, he knew the real work had just begun. Not in headlines or viral clips, but in quiet rooms, honest conversations, and the daily choice to see each other clearly. The story that started with a cruel remark in a coffee shop hadn't ended with a speech or a handshake. It had grown into a garden, a classroom, a home, a legacy, Not because one person was brave, but because many chose to listen, to learn, and to stay. And that more than anything was the point.